And welcome. This is our very first exploration together, and we're kicking things off at something pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to trace the story of video games right back to the beginning.
Exactly. Looking at how we got from like these simple little experiments to this massive global thing we have today. It's quite a journey.
It really is. And you might be surprised by where it all started. It wasn't always about flashy graphics and complex stories.
Right. So today we're looking at the dawn, the
Y-
pioneers,
Yeah.
the big ideas, the stuff that laid the groundwork.
We'll cover those first sparks, the lab tinkerings, and then, yeah, the first arcade machines and those early home consoles.
Cool. So let's start maybe even before what most people think of as the first video game.
Yeah.
You mentioned it wasn't always visual.
That's right. The core concepts, the programming, the rules that existed before pixels were really a thing in entertainment.
Okay, so you mean things like Alan Turing's Turochamp back in 1950, that chess thing.
Precisely. Turochamp. It was an algorithm, basically a set of rules for playing chess that a machine could follow.
But no screen, right? Just the logic.
Exactly. It ran on paper, essentially, but it proved a machine could follow rules for a game-like interaction with a person. That was huge conceptually.
Wow. Okay, so the seed of the idea was there, a machine playing by rules.
Yep. And even a bit earlier, 1947, there was something called the cathode ray tube amusement device.
Cathode ray tube, like an old TV screen.
Sort of, yeah. Inspired by radar tech. Thomas Goldsmith Jr. and Cecil Ray Mann built it,
Oh.
and this one was interactive on a screen.
What did it do?
You had knobs to control a beam, like a little dot, and you try to fire it at targets on the screen. Think Missile Command, but way, way simpler.
And was that sold?
No, never commercially produced, but it's recognized as, like, the first patent for an electronic game using a screen, a real landmark.
Okay, so early concepts, early screen interaction,
Yeah.
but mostly experimental. Where did things go next? University labs.
University labs became these unexpected hubs for this stuff, places where people had access to early computers.
Right, these massive machines.
Exactly. And it wasn't about profit. It was about discovery, pushing boundaries. You had things like Christopher Strachey's draft program, Dietrich Prince's chess, running on machines like the Franti Mark I in the early 50s.
More demonstrations of computer power.
Pretty much. But then came OXO in 1952, A.S. Douglas at Cambridge. That one's pretty significant.
Okay, day, like tic-tac-toe.
Yep, knots and crosses. And it used a CRT display so you could see the game board.
How did you play?
Get this, with a rotary telephone dial.
No way, seriously.
Yeah, you dial to choose your square. And what's really interesting is that it was part of Douglas's PhD thesis.
A PhD on
Tic-tac-toe.
human-computer interaction. OXO was his case study, a proof that computers could be engaging, interactive, not just calculators.
Okay, that makes sense. So still academic, but a huge step towards visual, interactive entertainment.
Definitely planted the seed, showed the potential.
So we've got these lab experiments. How do we get to games just for fun? Pure entertainment. Right, that's the next phase, kind of late 50s, early 60s. Moving beyond proofs of concept towards actual amusement.
And this is where Tennis for Two comes in. 1958.
That's the one. William Higginbotham at Brookhaven National Laboratory. The story's great. He basically built it to make the lab's visitor days less boring.
Huh. I love that. So what was it like?
He used an oscilloscope screen, not quite a TV, but a visual display. It showed a simple side view of a tennis court, just a line for the net and a dot for the ball.
And you could control it?
Yeah, with these custom controllers, knobs to change the angle, buttons to hit the ball. It was all analog, not digital yet, but it worked. People loved it.
And its only purpose was fun.
Purely entertainment. An interactive display to engage visitors. And crucially, he never patented it.
Wow. Just gave it away, essentially. It sounds a lot like a precursor to Pong.
Oh, absolutely. You can draw a direct line. But yeah, the motivation was different back then. More about sharing the tech.
Okay, so Tennis for Two was a big step. What else was brewing in the labs around then?
Well, fast forward just a few years to 1962, MIT. That's where Space War happened.
Ah, Space War. That sounds more like a game.
It absolutely was. Developed by Steve Russell and others for the PDP-1 mini computer, much more complex than Tennis for Two.
Mini computer. Still huge by today's standards, right?
Oh yeah, but smaller than the real behemoth. Space War was inspired by sci-fi. You had two players controlling spaceships.
The Needle and the Wedge, I think I read.
That's them. firing missiles at each other, orbiting a central star with gravity, limited fuel, even a hyperspace button for emergencies.
Okay, that's got strategy, action,
Uh-huh.
proper gameplay elements.
Totally. It used vector graphics, so lines and points creating the shapes, on a round CRT screen. Looked pretty cool and distinct, plus a random Starfield background.
And it got popular.
Hugely popular within MIT and other places that had PDP-1s. See, DEC, the company that made the PDP-1, often shipped the computer with Space War on the diagnostic tapes.
So it just spread naturally.
Kind of accidentally, yeah. It became this standard test program, but everyone played it. It really established multiplayer computer gaming and influenced a whole generation.
Okay, so we've got these really cool, influential games, but they're stuck in labs. How do they break out into the mainstream, into arcades?
Right, that's the big leap. And it really starts happening in the early 1970s. That's when the commercial side kicks in.
Enter Nolan Bushnell.
You got it. Bushnell encountered Space War as a student and was completely hooked. He saw the potential for it as a coin-operated game.
He wanted to put it in bars and stuff.
Exactly. His first crack at it was a game called Computer Space in 1971. He worked with Ted Dabney, licensed it to a company called Nutting Associates.
And that was the first commercial arcade video game.
First mass-produced coin-op video game, yeah. It had this wild, futuristic fiberglass cabinet. Looked amazing.
But it didn't do that well.
Unfortunately, no. It was maybe a bit too complicated for the average person back then. Space War had a lot of controls, and Computer Space inherited some of that complexity. People were used to simpler pinball machines.
Okay, a bit of a learning curve issue.
Probably, but Bushnell didn't give up. He learned from it, and in 1972, he and Dabney took what they'd learned and founded their own company.
Atari.
Atari! A name that would change everything.
Now, while Bushnell was focused on arcades, someone else was thinking about games at home, right? Ralph Baer.
Yes, Ralph Baer. Working at Sanders Associates, a defense contractor, believe it or not. Since the mid-60s, he'd been experimenting with the idea of playing games on a standard television set.
Which was pretty radical then. TVs were just for watching shows.
Totally. He developed several prototypes, culminating in what's known as the Brown Box around 1967-68, though development continued.
The brown box, what could it do?
It was basically the blueprint for the first home console. It could play different simple games, chase games, a target shooting game with a light gun accessory, even basic sports games.
How did you switch games?
It used these plug-in cards, almost like jumpers, that changed the circuitry to run a different game logic. Graphics were super simple, just squares or lines on the screen.
And this became the Magnavox Odyssey.
Exactly. Baer and Sanders Associates licensed the brown box technology to Magnavox, and in 1972, the Magnavox Odyssey hit the shelves. The world's first home video game console.
Wow, 1972. Same year Atari was founded. Busy year. What were the Odyssey games like?
There were about 12 launch games, things like table tennis, ski, Simon Says, Haunted House. But here's the catch. The console itself only produced very simple shapes, like dots and lines.
So how did you get a tennis court?
You had to stick plastic overlays onto your TV screen. They had the graphics printed on them, the court, the haunted house layout, whatever.
Oh, wow, that's rudimentary.
It was, but it worked. It wasn't a massive seller straight away, maybe 350,000 units eventually. Marketing was a bit confusing. Some people thought it only worked on Magnavox TVs.
Okay, but still, it proved the concept. Home video games were possible.
Absolutely. It opened the door. But then came the game that blew the doors wide open.
Pong.
Pong. Released by Atari just months after the Odyssey, November 1972.
And this one wasn't Bushnell's idea originally.
Well, Bushnell had seen the Odyssey's tennis game at a demo and tasked a new engineer, Alan Alcorn, with creating a similar game as basically a training exercise.
Just practice.
Yeah. But Alcorn went beyond just copying it. He added some key improvements.
Like what?
He made the paddles hit the ball at different angles depending on where it struck them, giving players more control. And he made the ball speed up the longer a rally went on, added excitement and sound, simple blips and blongs.
Little things, but they made a difference.
Huge difference. The gameplay was incredibly simple. 2 paddles, a square ball, a line for the net. Instantly understandable. Addictive.
And the story about the first machine in Andy Capp's Tavern.
Legendary. It supposedly broke down because the coin mechanism was jammed full of quarters. People just couldn't get enough of it.
Why do you think Pong hit so hard when the Odyssey's tennis game didn't quite?
Simplicity was key. It was intuitive, walk up, drop a coin, play. No complex rules, no overlays needed. It was social, competitive, easy to grasp, perfect for arcades and bars.
And it's just exploded.
Completely. Atari couldn't build them fast enough, and of course that success immediately attracted imitators.
The Pong clones.
Tons of them. Companies like Midway, Ramtech, everyone jumped on the bandwagon. It was chaotic, sure, but it rapidly grew the whole arcade video game market. Suddenly these machines were everywhere.
So Pong really established the arcade scene. But were other games starting to appear too? Beyond paddle games?
Oh yeah. Once Pong proved the model, developers started experimenting. Taito came out with Speed Race in '74, an early driving game. Key Games, which was secretly linked to Atari, had Tank in '74 using dual joysticks for movement.
Tank sounds cool.
It was. And then Taito's Gunfight in '75, which was notable for depicting two cowboys shooting at each other, one of the first with human characters in combat.
Okay, so the arcades were diversifying quickly after Pong.
Definitely. Pong opened the floodgates, proved video games could make serious money, and established arcades as places people would go specifically to play these new electronic games. The mid-'70s boom was well underway.
So arcades are buzzing. What about back at home? People must have wanted Pong in their living rooms.
Oh, absolutely. And Atari delivered. They released Home Pong in 1975, usually through Sears, and it was a massive hit.
Just Pong, though, like built into the console.
Yeah, initially these were dedicated consoles. You bought the box, it played Pong or maybe a couple of variations, but the limitation was obvious, you couldn't play new games on it.
Right, you need cartridges.
Exactly. Programmable consoles where you could buy games separately. That was the next big revolution for home gaming.
And the first one wasn't Atari, was it?
No, the Fairchild Channel F actually beat Atari to market in 1976. It was the first console to use interchangeable ROM cartridges.
But Atari System became the icon.
It did. The Atari Video Computer System, or VCS, launched in 1977, later renamed the Atari 2600. That's the one everyone remembers.
The wood grain. The joysticks.
That's the one. Technologically, it was kind of tricky to program for, very limited RAM, but the concept interchangeable cartridges with different games was brilliant.
What were the early games like? Combat came with it, right?
Yeah, Combat was the pack-in game, tank battles, biplane fights, simple stuff, but fun. The library grew slowly at first, but then 1980 happened.
Space Invaders.
The home port of Space Invaders. That was the Atari 2600's killer app. It turned the console from a modest success into an absolute phenomenon.
Why was that specific port so important?
Because Space Invaders was huge in the arcades. Being able to play a pretty decent version of it at home whenever you wanted, that was a massive draw. It quadrupled console sales, supposedly.
Wow. It single-handedly sold the system to millions.
Pretty much. And it opened the floodgates for more arcade conversions and original hits like Pitfall, Adventure, Missile Command. The 2600 ended up selling over 30 million units in its lifetime.
Incredible. Were there competitors trying to catch up?
Oh, definitely. Mattel released the Intellivision in 1979, which had better graphics. Then Coleco brought out the ColecoVision in '82, even more powerful, known for its excellent arcade ports. The console wars were just beginning.
And while all this console stuff was happening, computers were starting to get into homes too, right? The late 70s.
Exactly. 1977 was also a landmark year for personal computers. The Apple II, the Commodore PT, the Tandy TRS-80 all launched.
Were they seen as gaming machines then?
Not primarily. They were aimed at hobbyists, education, maybe small businesses, but because you could program them, people inevitably started making games.
Like those text adventures.
Precisely. Games like Colossal Cave Adventure and later Zork. No graphics, just text descriptions and typed commands, but incredibly immersive. You used your imagination.
A totally different kind of gaming.
Very different. And as computers like the Apple II got color graphics, you started seeing graphical adventures like Mystery House, early action games. Plus, there was this whole culture of typing in game code from magazines, hobbyists sharing software.
So a more DIY approach compared to the consoles.
Yeah, definitely more grassroots in the early days of PC gaming. It empowered creators in a different way.
So by the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, you've got these two major streams. Consoles bringing arcade action home, and PCs offering these other kinds of experiences, often text-based or more experimental.
That's a great summary. Arcades were still huge, home consoles were booming thanks to Atari, and personal computers were quietly building a whole different gaming universe. It really set the stage.
It's amazing looking back. From Turing's theoretical chess, to OXO on a lab computer, to Tennis for Two on an oscilloscope, Space War, then Pong exploding, and finally cartridges and home computers.
It's an incredible trajectory in just, 30 years? Driven by curiosity, technical skill, and eventually a keen sense of fun in business, these pioneers really did shape the future of entertainment.
Absolutely lay the foundation for everything we play today. It makes you think, doesn't it? Considering all those early steps, those humble beginnings, what do you feel was the absolute most crucial innovation? The one thing that really unlocked the door for modern gaming as we know it? Lots to ponder there.
It's a tough question.
Definitely something for you to think about too. Well, that's all we have time for in this first look back. Join us next time as we continue our journey. See you then.